Previously on the Leaky Bucket podcast.
I promise all of you listening, whatever bad thing you're happening right now is not life-threatening. It might be lifestyle-threatening, and that's just your ego talking, right? Because if you don't make the money you're going to make this month, you might not be able to pay for your Maserati payment. That's lifestyle-threatening. You will be okay. I've been there, okay? It's not a life-threatening situation 99.9% of the time in all of your business stuff, okay? Acknowledge it, right?
Hi there, and welcome to the Leaky Bucket podcast. I'm your host, Ian Morgan, and this is the financial performance podcast for entrepreneurs looking to get a better understanding of their numbers, to plug the leaks in their business, and to move from surviving to thriving. Hey there, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Leaky Bucket podcast. Today, we've got with us Dan Bradbury, who is a bit of an all-round, I suppose, guru in terms of business. He's got multiple businesses, exited multiple businesses as well, and then also now helps business owners to generate their first and future seven figures in terms of revenues, and in some cases even profits as well. Dan, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me, Ian.
So Dan, first of all, I'd like to just fire into some quick fire questions so people can get a bit of an understanding and that about you. In your opinion, what do you think you're most well known for?
Oh, good question. I suspect if you ask my clients, it'd be very different than if you ask my children. So I'm probably most well known for financial literacy, or being a bit of a translator of financial information for the average small business owner. I've scaled up and exited several businesses, a couple for seven figures, but I spend most of my times preaching about how turnover is vanity and profit is sanity.
Fantastic. What do you think people misjudge about you the most?
That's a good question. I think even though my partner sometimes tells me I'm an emotional stone, I can be a bit callous and cutting in my comments in mastermind sessions. Deep down somewhere hidden, I'm quite an emotionally sensitive being.
Fantastic. What are the three most important values that you live by?
Oh, that's a great question. So I suppose I'm inclined to default go to my business values, but for some reason I'll go to what comes up for me is kind of personal or family values, which I'll go with do the best you can, do the right thing, and show people that you care.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Like those. And Dan, would you rather win with no issues at all, or would you rather fall short and learn something new?
Yeah, that's a good question. It feels like a setup, but I'd definitely rather the latter. I think my whole life is orchestrated around my personal obsession with learning. So I actually think learning is winning.
Yeah, brilliant. Like it. So everybody's chasing success, right? But I think I find when I speak to different people, success means a different thing or means different things to different people. So for you, what does success look like?
I think success is being able to do what you want, when you want, with the people that you want. I mean, you could say that's actually a definition of freedom, but I think for me, success is loving the journey. So it's there's always going to be problems, but getting up and enjoying what you do every day with people that you love, I'm not sure there's many things better than that.
Okay, brilliant. Dan, obviously I've known you for a while and I know bits about your story, but for those sort of listeners, can you explain maybe a bit about your early life and what led you to where you're now currently at and what you're doing?
Yeah, I was the cliche could try harder, smart kid could try harder in school sort of person. And when I was I moved around a lot as a child. My father took various promotions within the company that he worked for, and so consequently I got to see a lot of different people, make friends in different backgrounds, but I didn't always fit in. So like a lot of young children, especially young boys in particular, I aspire to be successful and to make money, and that was further precipitated by one of my early relationships, was long-term romantic relationships, was with the daughter of a extremely well-known A-list celebrity musician, and that whetted my appetite for wanting all the flash and finer things in life. And so that got me on the direction of wanting to succeed in business, because I wasn't particularly athletic or musically gifted. So I decided to go for it in business and make millions there. And I very quickly, Ian, managed to rack up an astonishing £110,000 in personal debt at the age of 20 years old. And as my dad reminded me at the time, he said, "Son, that takes a special kind of stupid." And so that was a first massive failing, because I think I was pursuing it for the wrong reasons, and I was considering personal bankruptcy to get rid of the debt. But fortunately, I realised that the debt wasn't the problem; it was the symptom. And the symptom was I had a desires for a life that I couldn't afford. I couldn't afford to pay for. And actually, if I figured out how to pay off this debt in a quick, short order, I'd solve the problem called how do you create enough value that you can make enough money that you can create the lifestyle that you want.
Brilliant. How did you sort of move forward from that then? How did you decide what the next business is? How did they fare? What did you do from there?
Yeah, well, there's two elements. I was lucky to kind of stumble across accelerated learning techniques, which were, I figured that I had a growth mindset, i.e. you can learn how to do any skill. And then I ended up doing a speed reading course, and where I doubled my reading speed. It claimed to be able to double my reading speed with the same or better comprehension in 3 hours. And lo and behold, it actually delivered. I did the course, did all the practice, did the work, and it got the results. And then I suddenly had a epiphany when I was like, well, how fast is fast anyway? And I can be a little bit obsessive compulsive when I want to be. I'm naturally kind of wired that way. And so rather than put it into unhelpful traits or things, especially the young men especially can tend towards, unfortunately, I put it into, okay, how many books can I read? How can I consume all the information on a particular topic or topics? And I got into psychology and personal development and all kinds of things, and read I set out a goal to read a book a day for a year, and I accomplished that goal. And somewhere along the way, I came across, by good fortune, somebody who became my first real mentor that really guided me, which back then, it took the form of me getting a job working for his company. And because I recognised the reason my first company failed, Ian, and I racked up so much debt, is ultimately back then I couldn't market or sell. We had a really great product or service, but we couldn't attract the customers. And I wanted to develop that skill, and I got a mentor who gave me a job doing the thing that I was terrified with, which was telephone sales back then. And so by working for him for a couple of years, I honed selling skills that then developed into me taking the job of running the marketing for his company. So by the age of 21 years old, I was managing £20,000 per month of marketing ad spend. It was only a small business, but still, for a 21-year-old, I immersed myself from sales then to marketing. And then after I kind of honed some of those skills, I was ready to go out and try again.
Fantastic. So, Dan, you led with the information that actually one of your best things you're known for is your financial literacy. Was that always there? I assume not, with the debts that were created in those early stages. So was it from those pains that you created that level of understanding?
Yeah, 100%. Well, the financial literacy thing was interesting because in the first stage of my business journey, which was probably my mid-20s, by most people's standards, Ian, I was very successful because I'd learned marketing. So after I had this mentorship and the only job that I'd had for a couple of years, and then I went back out on my own, I very quickly built a business up to mid six-figure revenues with a decent, solid, healthy kind of low six-figure profit margin. So from my kind of early to mid 20s, by most people's standards, I was making a very large amount of money. But then as I got to my kind of mid to late 20s, I hit my head against the ceiling and I kind of plateaued. And I just kind of felt like, what's the expression? If all a person has, if the only tool a man has is a hammer, he treats everything as though it was a nail. And that was how I view business. I kind of, because I've got good at marketing, and I was really into direct response marketing and Dan Kennedy and Jay Abraham, and that served me really well. But then at a certain point, it stopped serving me. But I thought it was the solution to every problem. So whatever the business problem, it was just like, oh, better marketing. But of course, it ceased to be effective once I hit that kind of mid to high six-figure revenue. And I couldn't figure it out. And I was bumping my head against the ceiling. And then one day, I saw a guy speak on a Tony Robbins Wealth Mastery stage, and if anybody's seen the video of this, it was where is he? No, it's over here. This guy here, which is Keith Cunningham, who was the inspiration for Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad. And because the Rich Dad Poor Dad thing is a fable, it's not literally the case, but a lot of the core methodologies in that book were taught to Robert by Keith, and I heard Keith speak, and it was astonishing. And when I got to know Keith a little bit, I went on one of his went on one of his courses, and ultimately I've worked with him, been mentored by him for 10, 15 years now. He looked at one of my business plans, which was basically to double my revenues, in the next 12 months. And he basically looked at it and said, what a pile of crap. Like what an absolute pile of crap. Why are you doing all this extra work? He's like, why don't you do the same amount of work, but make a lot more money? And because he was so credible, I mean, this was a man that had a net worth real estate portfolio of over $100 million, lost it all, went bankrupt, and then built it all back up again. Because he was so credible, what I liked was he was tremendously successful, but he was financially marketing-wise, he was terrible. His sales and marketing, by my judgment, was hopeless. Yet, I was smart enough to go, you know what, there must be something this guy knows that I don't. And ultimately, he showed me it was financial literacy. I couldn't read the numbers. And so I followed his advice, and despite doing nothing from a marketing perspective in the next 12 months, I trebled my profits. And it was literally just by getting a little bit more educated about the numbers. And then, as I mentioned, because I'm a bit obsessive compulsive, when it worked for me to get a little bit financially literate, I thought, well, how financially literate can I get? I then proceeded to do everything that I can. And even though I've never done any financial qualifications, I do enjoy, standing toe to toe with finance directors or CFOs, etc. And I just love that stuff. I consume it with massive intensity.
Brilliant. I think, Dan, we delved into some of the challenges and that. What about some of your biggest successes? What do you think your biggest successes are within business?
Oh, good. I'm glad you said in business. Otherwise, I was definitely going to go down the cliche children route. But biggest successes in business. I think a couple of things come to mind. I mean, the easy ones to come to mind is I've bought, merged, and sold about a dozen different companies. And to be clear, I don't mean I've bought, merged, and sold on 12 of each of those. I mean, cumulatively, I've done kind of a dozen to 15 now, I think, different transactions. And a handful of those have been tremendously successful. And I say a handful because I think a lot of people pretend like, when you get no successes. My first seven-figure exit was in 2013. People kind of act like they ignore the fact that they're still failures. right? And I'm not trying to compare myself to him, but I aspire to be like him one day. When I look at something like Warren Buffett and still kind of go, a lot of his transactions aren't always successful. Now, he's got a higher batting average than most, but so it's part of the game. So I'd say I've done a couple of very successful, very profitable mergers or acquisitions or exits. But really, what I love and where I spend a large proportion of my time now, day to day, in is the mastermind programs that I do. As far as I'm aware, I've got the highest retention rate of any mastermind program in the UK, and that's very much by design. We're selective over who comes into the program and the right mindset and the right business models and growth aspirations. And so I love the fact that we've seen a lot of people grow and blossom over 3, 5, even 10 years now, that people have been in the program and had some of the fastest growing companies in the UK inside the program.
Yep. Dan, what do you think your biggest challenges have been, and more importantly, what did you learn from them?
So I think my biggest challenges, I believe that there's only really 6 different categories a business problem. I think everyone thinks their business is unique and different, but actually if you strip it back, whilst it might show up tactically differently, I can put it into 6 different buckets. And so in my early days, I think a problem was finance. I didn't understand finance and cash flow, so I got myself into all kinds of messes where it was profitable but not cash flow positive or whatever. Or I didn't understand the margins and I drove revenue, but with eroding profitability. Right? I got diminishing returns rather than economies of scale. So I think those problems, the finance problems as one category, created a level of depth. And so, as at the time we're recording this, going into, or even in, depending on how you count a recession, there's a lot of people that are really, really scared. But, I remember the global financial crisis of 08, 09, and having gone through that, and not just gone through that, but grown, the business doubled and doubled again in 2007, 8, and 9. And so having thrived in that recession and solved those problems created a tremendous internal resilience, which just means it's a lot more fun. Now, to be clear, I'm not trying to say that I always get it right. I've made plenty of mistakes then, but it created a huge armory of financial tools to be able to solve, if correctly deployed. If the problem's diagnosed correctly and the tools are correctly deployed, I think it will solve the overwhelming majority of financial problems. So that's probably one question that makes me feel very confident when it comes to talking about financial issues as it relates to a business. I think a second issue, category of the 6, would be people issues. I think Jeff Smart says it right. You haven't got a how problem. How do I grow my business? You've got a who problem. Who is it that I need to hire in order to scale my business? And I think a lot of businesses struggle there. But worst, it's not that they struggle to hire; it's that they hire the wrong person. And I've hired, only a couple over the years of people that were very toxic culturally and very detrimental and took away from the business. Now, I won't speak specifically, obviously, to those individuals, but if I look at the commonality between those 2 people, or maybe 3, depending on how I count, people that were most toxic and destructive, is when I was lured in by the fact that they had a shiny resume or they had a really good sales pitch about how they were going to help me. And I got lazy because the fact was I thought they had the skills to help me, but actually their values weren't aligned with my values. Doesn't mean that they're bad people. It just means that they behaved in a variety of ways, and in one case tremendously unethical. And I think in hindsight I was either naive at best or I turned a blind eye at worse, because I thought it was serving a greater good, and in the end it came back to bite me on the ass. So back to the personal value of just doing the right thing, right?
Yep. Go on then, Dan. You've given the first two of the 6. What's the other 4?
Yeah, now going to the sales pitch. No. So the 6 are easy. When I say they're easy, I'd encourage anybody listening to this to you can probably figure it out, right? Like, so most businesses say, especially early stage, start in the first 2 categories. They go, I can't get clients, which is the first 2, which is marketing and sales. So there's a lot of marketing problems. How do we get the message out there? Sales, how do we convert them into becoming customers? Then you've got, okay, well, we've got to run the business. So that's on one hand, it's operations. What's the business model and what are the systems upon which it works? And then there's people, getting the right people to execute it. You can have the right systems, but the wrong people, it doesn't work. So that's the first 4: sales and marketing, operations, systems, and people. Hiring, keeping, leading, etc. And then the last 2, we've mentioned one already, which is finance, i.e. all things financial. So again, that can speak to margins, it can speak to cash flow management, right? And other factors as well. And the last one is the one that's most, it's not the most important, but it's the one that's got the sharpest sting in the tail if you get it wrong and can ruin a business virtually overnight, and that's legal and governance. Right, it's kind of like if you haven't got the right contracts in place, if you haven't got the right governance and guardrails, then all of a sudden a business can just disappear, be shut down, be closed, be sued to the ends of the earth because you didn't do something right from a legal or governance perspective. So that's the 6.
Yep, fantastic.
And I'm not going to push you now, Ian, because it's your podcast. I'm not going to put you on the spot. But I challenge people listening to this to say, okay, can you think of a business challenge that you've had in the past that you can't put in one of those 6 buckets? And I've had plenty of people try, but I kind of go, no, it's this bucket. Occasionally they go, oh, there's this problem, and you go, well, that could be either this one or that one, right? It's more. It can be more than one, but I struggle to find examples. Somebody once said, well, what about mergers and acquisitions? Because truthfully, with my clients, Ian, as you know, like I'll teach mergers and acquisitions as a separate thing from the 6. But truthfully, you go, well, hold on. If a merger or acquisition doesn't work, why was that? Right? And you kind of go, well, was it a financial thing because you overpaid? Or was it because of a people, cultural issue? Or was it because the systems didn't work right? So on and so forth. So I think it normally... writing on a postcard, or I suppose in today's world, post on social media if you can think of something that you think falls outside of those 6.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to sort of rack my brains then as you were speaking and thinking, I'm struggling to think of any issues and problems that we had that don't fall within those. So yeah, no, like them, very good. Dan, as you know, right, it's the Leaky Bucket podcast, and for clarity, right, the leaky bucket is... it's all of those small issues that occur within a business that so many business owners just don't give any attention to. And sooner or later, they do become big issues. And they may not necessarily stop you getting to being successful, but they'll certainly stop you staying there. What do you do to make sure that you ensure that you can spot those issues and you can reduce the risk that you're going to get blindsided by them?
Great question. So, I mean, to the first point, actually before the first point, what a great name. I said as soon as you announced the name for a podcast, what a great name for a podcast. I love it. Because, I mean, I spoke about this a lot in my first book, which is Breeding Gazelles, Fast Track Growth for Your Business. I mean, I call it the compound effect. Now, in the book, I'm actually only talking about it from a sales side, but truthfully, you kind of go, there's all these different pieces in your business, and there's a compound effect by optimizing the individual pieces. But to be able to optimize the individual pieces, you need to be able to measure it, right? So I think whether you want to talk about the sales process as I discussed, which is a bit myopic in Breeding Gazelles, or whether you want to talk about the 6 categories inside a business where the business problems sit that we just mentioned, or a different way that I categorized it was in my last book, Turnover is Vanity, Profit Sanity, when I called it 9.5, and that's because me and the editor argued about whether it was 9 or 10 categories. It was served as a checklist to say, you know what, if I'm assessing your business, or if I'm assessing my own businesses, or if I'm looking to right now weighing up an investment in a couple of businesses, if I'm looking to put whether or not this makes sense, I'm saying, can I buy the business at X and take it to Y? Right? And even if you're listening to this, some people, Ian, have switched off and go, well, I'm not looking to acquire a business. But the fact is, Ian, they're buying a business by choosing to stay in the business that they're in. Right? If they don't sell it, they're choosing to keep it. And there's an opportunity cost by not doing something else. You owe it to yourself to get the maximum possible return. So I kind of go, what's your checklist? Right? So I could do it 3 different ways. But as in 2 of them are in my book, and I've just told you the 6 different ways, which is probably going to be, well, it's not my next book because my next book's written but not published yet, but the book after that will probably go more in depth into those 6 areas. But there's got to be some kind of areas in which you're measuring. There'll be some kind of KPI or KPIs, and then I'm constantly revisiting these. I think, Ian, you and I have spoken in the past that people think there's some profound magic secret to success, and it's just blatantly not true, right? If you look at Warren Buffett, or you look at Elon Musk, or you look at any of the greats, it's not one profound idea. I mean, Elon Musk is perhaps the most adventurous, innovative, but still behind all of that, there's a lot of core fundamentals that are done really, really well over a very extended period of time. So for me, I've got my little checklist, and I work on a quarterly cycle. Really, there are a few things that I'm perhaps only looking at strategically on an annual basis, but most things operationally, there's quite a deep dive review done quarterly, and then on a more micro scale, there's a weekly check-in on those KPIs that correlate to the key different areas of a business, which says, here's where we are, here's where we want to be. So that's the trajectory. Okay, so we've got these metrics that we can measure to say, are we on track? And we are, when I say we, I mean my team and I, are constantly flickering between here's what's going on, here's what the cockpit of our business is telling us, what metrics are being fed back, and a lot of those are financially in, but some of them aren't financial. And how does that correlate with the plan, and where do we need to adjust? So, we're constantly trying to micro adjust to keep us on track. So a different way of saying that is, actually it's another Keith Cunningham quote, to give it tribute where it's due, was he told me once, I kept coming to him with crazy new ideas, and he was like, Dan, getting rich is boring. And what he meant by that was, I was the one that was screwing my business up by trying to do new things all the time. And there is a place, I can already hear people cringing in, there is a place for innovation and creativity, but the bedrock of the business is the core fundamentals just being knocked out consistently. An easier analogy would be, if you think of something like a Usain Bolt, who's obviously retired now, right? At the root, there was consistent training that followed core fundamental principles of training and adaptation that he did for decades, right? And that's what caused him to be, the fastest sprinter who's ever lived, up to this date, at least, right? It's those core fundamentals, and I think the exact same is true in business. So I think you've got to be clear on your checklist, and I think you've got to be obsessed with the journey of constantly checking in. The best in the world are measuring freaks. It's probably a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I certainly know that when I joined your program, I thought, yes, I'm going to get to all these successful business owners, and I'm going to learn the secret. I'm going to find out what it is that they know that I don't, that's going to transform my life and make me successful. And yeah, I think one of these things was actually just stop coming up with new ideas. Just focus on what is it that you've got that really, really works, and then just stick at it. Be consistent in the approach that we're doing, and that's certainly come together for us. Certainly during 2022, we're on target to have our best year in business ever in terms of revenues and profits. But it's probably been the easiest year in business ever.
Yes.
It's just felt it's just felt sensible. I've called it, and I've made it sort of like it's scaling as opposed to growing. Growing feels like it's painful. You're trying to drag it forward. Scaling is that I know what works. We just need to find a way to repeat it in a sensible fashion.
Well, I've got 2 points that I may. One is from somebody who one person I'll name and the other I won't because of what I'll share. The one that I'll name is by a mastermind member that you know, Ian, called Alexis Kingsbury. And one time he won our kind of mastermind member of the quarter award. And somebody said, "Oh, what was it you did, Alexis, this quarter that, you know, increased your revenue by X and your profit by Y?" And he went, "Absolutely nothing." And the member said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "It's what I did 12 months ago that's creating the results today." Yeah. And that was a really useful and I think helpful perspective of talking about the long term. And of again, there isn't really a secret, and also those fundamentals often they compound over time. So I'll give another example that was both positive and negative simultaneously. And the invite I'll say to the listeners is, I think it was Einstein that quoted, "Genius is the ability to hold two opposing thoughts simultaneously." So I won't mention, but there's somebody who you know, Ian, who joined the program 4, 5, 6 years ago, had kind of six-figure revenues, and now they've got multi-seven-figure profits. Been tremendously successful. You know, had one business, now they've got, you know, 3, etc. They've really done great. And actually, well, I'll tell you afterwards, but it's probably not the one you're thinking of, it's another one. But I was just on a call with this individual. So on the one hand, it's proof is in the pudding, because the core business smashed it, made the money, which allowed for the second business, smashed it, nailed it, which is funded the third business, right? It's funded the assets. It's more of the third business is more of an investment vehicle, right? Actually, you know, it wouldn't be. It's okay for me to just broadly say the third business, it relates to a lot of investment in property, because the other two businesses spin off a lot of cash, which creates, you know. So I remember a call early on. This person said, "I've got $500,000 in cash. What do I do with it?" And I went, "Nothing right now." Like we're still nailing down your first business. But when it was really nailed, then it was like, okay, we've got this large amount of cash. Let's invest it in other income-producing assets. And so on the one hand, that's proofs in the pudding, right? Because people look at him and other people like him in our program, and I'll point out the people that are most successful in our program are the ones who've been in it the longest. And whilst I'm complimented by the fact they've stayed in the program because they're getting value, actually you're going to know the reason why they've got the best results is because they've stuck to their knitting, so to speak. They've stayed with the fundamentals, and therefore it compounds over time. So people look up and go, "Oh my God, how do you have 7-figure profits?" And it's not what they've done now or even this year. They've made consistently good decisions and good financial disciplines. But the bad side of this story, why I'm not naming this individual, is because, you know, the call we just had, you know, there's a pretty significant problem, right? There's a pretty significant problem in this business, and I'll leave it as ambiguous in case anybody is listening to this that can kind of figure out who I might be talking about, because they're quite well known in my circle. It's just a people problem. It's a people problem, right? So this individual, all the individuals that are doing well, they've all got problems simultaneously, and in fact, I'd actually argue they've got bigger problems than when they were a tenth of the size. Right? Rather than being their first employee problem, they've now got an issue with the person that's running one of their companies problem. Right? So rather than somebody that's paid 20 grand, it's somebody that's paid 200 grand. And yet they've gone rogue, or they've got a drug addiction, or they're stealing from the company. Like this stuff still happens. Hopefully it's a higher quality problem that you can look at from a more elevated position. And so it's still the same core principles that drive it all.
Dan is actually a brilliant segue into my next point, which was going to be people I think who don't yet have some element of success, who are on that pathway. They look at successful people and they think, "Oh, they've got it so easy," right? And obviously, we know that that's not the reality. And you've just led to that in terms of what you're saying. So actually, give us a flavour. What's something you're happy to share at the moment that you've got as a challenge and a difficulty within your businesses that you're currently trying to fix?
Oh, great question. So it's an interesting time for me, Ian. let me preempt this by saying, for some people, if they're in a tough spot right now, this might sound arrogant and egotistical, and it's really not meant to. I remember somebody sharing a problem such as this when I was in a bad place, and I didn't take it well, or I didn't understand or even believe it. Right, which is one of my most recent problems is I've been too profitable, and you kind of go flippantly like, well, how is that possible? And so in one of my businesses, we'd had record-breaking year after year. So like 3 years on the bounce. Is that true or is it 4? Yeah, so 3 or 4, it doesn't matter which. Record-breaking, revenue and profit. Okay? So working really well, very high margins. But the problem is, in the early days when the business was running more lean and close to the bone, I was very stingy at taking on any additional overhead, because I'd made mistakes like that in the past that had hurt me quite badly. I took on too much overhead, and when the business turned, I was kind of eaten alive by overhead and ended up losing that business, having to put it under and make people redundant. And that was horrendous for me. So I'd learned lessons from that, and I was keeping the overhead really lean. I really run the lean overhead. And the staff would tell me we need more people, and I would go, no, we can work. And I managed to, more than double the revenues of this business with the exact same staff, exact same overhead, by squeezing out efficiencies. But then all of a sudden, it felt like it was getting really hard. And then you lose a staff member, and when the team's running lean, you don't have much capacity or margin for error. So then that caused problems. Then you've got to hire somebody, but in hindsight, and then meanwhile, because all that's going on, you're not able to continue the growth rate. So the growth became unsustainable. So what happened in this business was the growth, and I did catch it before the growth stopped, but the growth slowed. And then I kind of, as it was slowing, I went, oh, I need to do something about this. I need to invest more and create the capacity for growth. But I was a little bit too late. So my mistake was I was too profitable. I didn't reinvest enough soon enough, which meant that, we kind of plateaued, and actually the revenues even then regressed a little bit. So then your revenues are coming down, but your expenses are going up because you're investing in people and infrastructure and overhead, right, to create for the next stage of growth, which of course means that your profit nosedives, revenue down, expenses up. It doesn't take rocket science that it massively destroys profit. And it is egotistical because still some people might be listening to this and their business is losing money, right, etc., or has a weak balance sheet and then they can't withstand the knock. Unfortunately, I'd learned enough. I didn't make that mistake as well, because I learned that lesson from times previous. If business was easy, everybody would do it, as in be succeeding at it, right? It's not easy. So I think it's Jim Rohn who said, "Don't wish it were easy, wish that you were better." And I'm like, yeah, that's it. It's like hone your skill. If you want a better business, be a better business owner. And there's always problems, and sometimes the thing that you need to do now is it's the exact opposite in 1 or 2 or 3 years time. So 3 or 4 years ago, what I needed to do was like absolutely nail the overhead and just squeeze out from the assets that I've got. And then as the business went through its cycle, actually I needed to switch, and I didn't do it quickly. I needed to reinvest some of those profits into growth. Right, and I didn't, and therefore it hurt me. But somebody listening to this, that would be the worst thing they could do. There's somebody listening to this going, "Oh yeah, I need to reinvest in the growth." No, you don't. No, you don't. You need to cut things out, and you need to squeeze out the efficiencies. And so it really depends on where your business is at in its cycle, in its life stage. And I wish I could make it simpler, but the diagnosis is everything. So prescription without proper diagnosis is malpractice. If you went to your doctor and they prescribed you a drug before you told them what was wrong with you, or they'd done any tests, you'd report them. Like they're going to kill somebody. And yet business owners do that all the time. They just hear something somebody says, including me right now, and go, "Oh yeah, that's my problem." Well, I don't think you should abdicate to some business guru telling you the answer. I think you need to be engaged but neither do I think you should diagnose your own problems if you're inexperienced. That's the value of podcasts like this, getting different perspectives. I don't think you should abdicate financially to your accountants and just listen to everything blindly that they say. That's idiotic. If there's a problem with your accounts, HMRC, you're the one that signed off those accounts, right? But equally, you shouldn't try and do your accounts yourself, because that's crazy. You don't know the tax code. That's why you've got to work with your accountant, and the same is true for every other area of business as well.
Yeah, to be fair, Dan, that exact thing was one of the breakthrough moments we had when we had this sort of fundamental idea when we come and joined your program, and then just hearing the side of business owners and that sort of things, we just went, we've got these options of like, you can do it yourself, or actually you can just let us do it all for you. Actually, we very quickly just removed both of those options and went, no, the only option we offer is we do it together, because we need that investment. We need you to understand. You don't have to become an accountant and understand finances, but actually you need to be able to understand what's good and what's bad within your own business. Otherwise, how do you make a decision to make it better?
Correct.
Yeah, I think it was one of the fundamental learnings to go, actually, we're giving people too many options. We just got to go, do you know what? This isn't, you can't, probably any of those areas, to be fair, that you mentioned, the six areas earlier, you still need to be involved. You can't just hand them over and go, you just fix it for me. And equally, you probably don't just want to have a go and see how it goes yourself.
Yeah, I mean, here's a good example, Ian, and this is, we might lose some people that are less financially inclined. This is actually, I'll try and keep it high level.
Hey there, really sorry for interrupting, but I really wanted to let you know about some amazing bonus content we have available for you. You see, not only do we record behind the scenes, but also we go deeper into some of the key topics that come up during the conversation. Now, you can find out more about this and access all of it free of charge over on Facebook. Just search for the Leaky Bucket Podcast Community.
I had a coaching session earlier today with a client, and they were really struggling with their accounts, right? So relatively new, really struggling with their accounts, solid, profitable business. And I looked at it, and whilst their bookkeeper and accountant were doing nothing incorrect, like, again, to be clear, I'm not an accountant, but there was nothing incorrect on there. But the data, the way in which it was reported to the business owner wasn't helpful. It was confusing. It was really confusing them. So there was a whole load of stuff that was extraordinary, that was one-time expense, that was just being thrown in with other stuff in the P&L or in COGS actually, which just completely scuppered things, and it made the whole P&L look weird. So the business owner was going, I don't get this. I can't read the cockpit of my business. And even though all the net profit, as declared, is all accurate, the accountant actually joined the call, so we had the call together, and it was very clear to me, because I've got a lot of references, to kind of go, let's just call him Bob. What Bob needs to see is this, this, and this, and actually, like, your first job is compliance. I said there's two jobs. Number one is compliance. It's got to be compliant, right, correct for the taxman. That's number one. That goes without saying. But number two is, you've got to give reports that allows Bob to make the right decisions, make the right business decisions, to make decisions about strategically where to move the business. And of course, because Bob hadn't been clear with the accountants, she'd just done the compliance bit. And as soon as we had a discussion, said, it's obvious, we need to move this out as an extraordinary expense and show it as a different category. She was like, that I can see. That'll make it much clearer. So nothing's changed, except everything's changed from the point of view of clarity for the business owner that can then make some more informed decisions.
Yeah, brilliant. Dan, when was the first time that you realised that you didn't have all the answers? What actually happened, and how did it change you and your approach?
Oh, good question. Funnily enough, my son. So, as we record this, my children are 13, 11 and 8. And I can't remember what my son asked me yesterday, but he asked me a question, and I went, I don't know, Jensen. I don't know. And he went, but Dad, I thought you know everything. And to which my response was, I'm like, well, that's definitely not true. And I said, actually, Jensen, the older I get, the less I realise I know. so then he said, and I meant it, and he said, well, how does that make sense? Because you're always, learning, you're always like studying, you're always trying to get more. Which is obviously a habit that I try and instill in my children. And I went, yeah, that's true, Jensen, but two things. First of all, the knowledge of mankind is growing at a rate faster than I could ever absorb it, even though I give it a good go. And secondly, I said it's actually to do with your ego. I said I've now got greater recognition of a massive amount of knowledge that I don't know. So there's always another perspective, and just because you can have two different perspectives, and it doesn't make one right, one wrong. Where I think, especially when I was a younger man, it was much more myopic. It was like, well, I'm right and you're wrong. So it was more egocentrically driven. So for me, nothing quite punches you so hard in the face as life. I'm sure there was some when I was a kid, but I think, my first business, when I racked up that personal debt, that was a huge wake-up call when I realised I didn't know what I needed to know. I think in addition to that, I've been divorced, so even though I've got 3 wonderful children out the marriage, that was like anybody that's been divorced can, or not anybody, I would say the vast majority would go, yeah, there was significant lessons, significant pain there. And another one was, accounting related. At one point, I was naive and a bit greedy, and I switched accountant because they sold me the dream of how they could make me all these savings. And I genuinely believed it to be legitimate. I thought I was just being clever, and by getting a more skilled ex-PwC accountant, etc., etc., etc. But, in hindsight, it was pure and simply tax avoidance. And then HMRC came crushing down on every single one of that accountant's clients because they were kind of cutting off the scheme at its source, as it were. And unfortunately for me, I had 6 or 7 companies at that time, all with the same accountant. So open 6 or 7 investigations going back, I think on average 4 years per business, and all of a sudden you got a big problem. And I was like, holy shit, I should know better than this. And then also, just to throw one other one in, good measure, and then you can pick from whatever you want, Ian. I spoke about this on another podcast, on a legal podcast. After I did my first 7-figure exit, I thought I knew everything there was to do about mergers and acquisitions. I'd done a few baby ones, and then I did a 7-figure one. I thought, I've got this cracked. And I took another company of mine to exit to a publicly listed company. And because I was a bit naive and a little bit aggressive, we basically ended up falling out, and it ended up in me getting sued for, multiple 7 figures. I can't say the amount because there's a legal settlement around it, but I could say I didn't lose because we didn't go to court. I settled, but anybody that knows legal experience, if you settled, that basically means you lost. so any of those occasions, I've been reminded that I don't know everything, and now I kind of go, I think it's safer to assume I know very little, and always try and keep my ego in check. Don't always succeed, to be clear. I'm not. Yep. It'd be egotistical to make a claim I'm without ego. I'm perfect in every way, but hopefully I'm a little bit humbler than I was 10 years ago.
Dan, actually, it worked well in terms of, I often refer to this in terms of other interviews I've done, to go, I think in order for somebody to start a business, you have to have a level of ego, because you have to think you're capable of doing what others can't. But actually, I think in order for then that business to become successful, and you need that reliance upon other people, and you need to be, you need to not be disingenuous to clients and customers. That ego has to be in check and kept. How do you find that balance? Because the ego is obviously got to be there to move forward and think you can do the impossible, but it's also got to be in check to go, actually, it can undo you. You need to be able to leverage those people around you who are potentially better skilled in other areas that can then ultimately move you forward.
Yeah, I think I once heard it described by a guy called Jeff Mass, because it's not so much about balance, it's about harmony. You know, so like people think, whether it be in life or in business, they talk about life balance, right? Everything being perfectly balanced, and that's just not true. He argued, I think successfully, it's about harmony, understanding that there's particular notes that need to be played in a particular order for it to make sense. And I think people act as though, oh, you know, you got almost like there's a perfect balance of ego and yet also be humble. Well, there might be a balance, but in reality, there are certain circumstances. I mean, you articulated it in the context of timeline of a business. When you start, yeah, you need enough ego to get going and withstand the knocks and power through, and we're gonna. But actually, once you start hiring team members and accepting that you've made mistakes and things like that, you need to be humble. And I don't think it's like you do both optimally all the time. I think it's more ebbs and flows. So even though I think it's the same me, a different analogy with me, I'm different at work than I am with my children, right? Like it's a different context if I'm in a mastermind session versus if I'm out on a date with my partner, right? Maybe same values underpinning it, but like how it shows up tactically will change. And I think so you need to hone those muscles. Yeah, this is probably a better analogy. You need to hone those muscles, and if you're going to become a more established, long-term success, larger business owner, all those muscles need different levels of strength in those 6 areas, but certain ones need to be deployed more heavily at certain times, depending upon what it is you're trying to do. That's I can't even remember the exact original question, Ian, so you have to redirect me, but that felt like an appropriate answer.
No, it was good. It's that balance between ego that you need and controlling that ego to get. You can't have a team and then constantly think you're better than your team, because your team won't perform. So you need to have that.
It'll hold you back massively.
Yeah. So no, useful. Dan, one area that we've bumped heads on previously is cars, company cars. We both see the same sets of data, the same information. We both see it from different angles. My argument is with the significant tax allowances that are available, certainly for electric vehicles currently, that there's great advantages to having vehicles within a company. Your argument is, why on earth would you be financing a depreciating asset? Where do you see the strengths from your side of the argument, and where do you how would you back up your side of things?
Yeah, look, I it depends on your overall outcome. So here's a fun analogy that I heard today, right? I saw a video on YouTube where somebody was arguing. Mike Berry, who's the finance expert that predicted, he shorted all the banks in the global financial crisis. So he was played by Christian Bale in The Big Short, the film The Big Short, against Warren Buffett. And so Mike Berry's saying ETFs or index trackers are a massive bubble. And yet Warren Buffett's still saying, the way for most people to play the market is to do long-term index trackers. And this YouTuber did a really great job showing the evidence that both well-established, financial, very well-respected financial institutions, if you like, have for why ETFs, are a bubble versus no, they're the best investment. And to speed this up for this podcast, the podcaster said, well, effectively they're both right. Arguably, it's just about time frame. So Michael Berry's saying we're there now, but Warren Buffett's talking about a holding period of forever, over many, many decades, right? And he says, so you might be in a bubble now, and Mike Berry's shorting everything now, and it's going to crash and tumble, and it obviously only time will tell. But he might be absolutely right. But Buffett's kind of saying, well, it doesn't matter if you bought at the peak of the markets, index trackers in 2008. In 2009, you would have been down 56%, I think, from memory. However, so that you'd be freaking out. However, it takes 5.5 years to get back to break even, but if you were still holding it 10 years after that, or kind of close to today, you're actually up 156%. So even now, over a long period of time, it's not one or the other, it's the context of time frame. So now taking that and switching it over here, it depends what your outcome is. I don't think ours is about time framing, and I think yours and my difference of opinion, which I think you articulated well, is about depends on your outcome. So my argument, before I'll let you into a little secret of how I may have changed my position, my argument fundamentally was based on most business owners don't have financial discipline, and they think of how do we use tax code of ways of figuring out a way of getting a better lifestyle and getting a little tax break. And my argument is, if you want to build wealth to free you up to do the things you want, ultimately the biggest indicator of your future wealth is your savings rate. It's not even your return on your investments. It's about how much of your income are you putting into savings. And financing a depreciating asset is batshit crazy. Most people don't need £50,000 cars. Like most people haven't got £50,000 in their fucking pension. Oh, excuse me. Damn it, I've done really well. I never made an hour without swearing in. Apologies if you have to go and edit that out. Like most people, and then as soon as you zoom out and you go, if your outcome is called creating financial freedom and wealth, yet you're sabotaging yourself by having all these lifestyle things and getting expensive stuff. And if you're spending, a year's worth of income, even if it's always, it's finance, I'm only doing the monthly payments. To me, that is financially retarded speaking if your outcome is wealth. So that's, so I can probably argue your side of the story as well. But if you want me to argue with myself, but I'll pause there in case you want to jump in from your perspective.
No, I think your point of view is sensible, and I think this is the thing, isn't it? To go, actually, I can see it from your argument and your side, and at the same point, I go, right, I see all that, and it makes complete logical sense, and yet I sold a car that I own personally with no finance on it, and financed the car through my company, because actually, logically, at the time, for what we needed financially, it made complete sense, and just went, actually, if it wasn't for the fact that the tax rates within the company were highly advantageous in terms of the tax savings on the actual asset, and also that I was not going to be taxed. I was going to be taxed next to nothing personally on it. Was just like this almost feels like a no-brainer. To the finance gets wiped out and some by the tax advantage.
Yeah. Well, and here, Ian, that's where I would go. I agree with you, and I probably softened my position. In fact, just recently I did a deep dive in it. I'd not looked at it for a couple of years. I'd heard the headlines, but I'd not dived in on it. So we just did, two of my companies had, the stat accounts due. So we were doing the last review sign off with my accountant. And I then brought it up as hey, let's have a chat about this. And ironically, he was not dissimilar to me. He drives was driving a 15-year-old Lexus, and basically said, I'm now the best husband in the world because I've just bought, or we've bought a company car, like electric car, blah, 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 and here's why, and here's all the numbers. So we got into the nuances, and I probably still, whilst I still maintain my position, I will relent and say the tax changes have made it significantly more advantageous around obviously new electric vehicles, and you're only paying the benefit in kind. Again, not so we get lost in the nuances, but everything you say out makes sense. Like, it's a company expense, it's fully costed, it comes off, so you've got your corp tax relief, your income tax, and therefore it's advantageous. Whether or not that offsets, the fact is, I think the prices are stupid high for those cars. Now, we could get into debating that, but I do think the tax laws have changed enough to go, yeah, you know what? If I'm comparing like for like if I'm buying a new electric vehicle, you'd be an idiot not to buy it through your company rather than buy it personally, obviously. And then you get into nuances of going, well, hold on, if I buy an electric car for 50 grand or a diesel car personally for 20 grand, 50 grand for the company or 20 grand, you could do some kind of analysis and go, oh, okay, well actually it's more advantageous to buy the electric car, and that might be true, and that's when I just zoom back out to the, yeah, hold on, just be careful, because entrepreneurs are notoriously optimistic that the future's always great, it's always rosy, and you're signing up for these payments. Somebody's paying that 50 grand plus the interest. Right now, it might be tax efficient, but you've signed up for a 50 grand thing when you could have had a 5 grand thing, right? And I think we just,
Yep.
as entrepreneurs, we lean towards, oh yeah, well, we want it, we earn it, we deserve, and it's non-logical, emotional bullshit that we're using to justify making poor financial choices. But if you zoom out, Ian, and here's where I would agree with you, because you kind of go, you got your financial house in order, obviously. You kind of go, okay, like, and then you zoom out, and somebody's their business accounts and finances are in order and established and solid and robust. Their personal financial house is in order. But normally the people that are coming with these arguments to me are people with a shitload of personal debt in a highly erratic, unstable business. And actually, it's not even about the car. It's about that's how they make decisions. So the same people have also got, they're getting sued. They've also got like tax investigations going on. They're also, right? And you're going to go, oh my God, just make your life easy. But in a nutshell, Ian, despite everything I've said, I'm in favour of you doing it. And even though I've not done it, I did say to my partner after my accountant gave me the lecture, she drives a old banger of a car quite proudly. I went, okay, almost when this car dies, okay, I think it might be company electric car time. So you could argue that you'll win the argument in the end. But I'll still maintain, if somebody's asking me the question because they want to just justify overspending on a ridiculous new model, I'd encourage them to think twice.
Yeah, I think ultimately ours was, and we questioned and looked at this and went, right, come on, this is our view. We like the tax advantages. Know your view in our position. So myself and Sam, we sat down and went through it. And our predicament was, we started an extension on our property. Building material prices go through the roof.
Right,
and we go, right, what's the worst situation you can be in, which is a 90% built extension. It has no value. You can't use it. You can't revalue the property based off it. It was no man's land to be in. So we sort of went to it, okay, what do we need? We were like, oh, we need 25 grand really to get it through. Okay, we've got a car sat there worth 21, 22, or we can go and take the money from the company. Company's financially stable, we could do that. However, higher rate tax, going to hit, a third of that at least in tax in that respect. And just went, this is seriously stacking in the favour of the car, just to go, actually, the finance effect, if you like, of the car, actually, that's quite minor in terms of we can free up an asset, get 20-odd thousand pound, effectively end up with a car in the company. The only alternative to free up that level of money was we go to something that potentially is that unreliable, that then potentially do we put our income generating activities at risk to go, actually, if I need to be able to travel, to visit clients, to go to the office and do whatever, if the car won't start because it's unreliable because of what we then could afford, we're like, no, this just doesn't stack for us. But I also agree that actually the majority of people we see through doing accounts that have got high finance on vehicles are really the people who should not have any finance whatsoever on any type of vehicle. It's
Correct.
usually stacked completely the wrong way.
Correct. And so I really like Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's business partner's thought on this, which is you shouldn't have an argument without understanding more about your opponent's point of view than they do. And so on this one, I kind of go, you kind of need to argue with yourself. You know what I mean? So if you're listening to this right now, if you rewind and think about what Ian said, he said Ian and Sam sat down and really looked at it and considered, which meant they didn't sit there and go, let's think of all the reasons to justify why we should do this. It was kind of going, okay, objectively, let me do this. So my final question before I make any major investment, Ian, I mean, I actually bounce this off. There's two people probably in my life that I do this with, but I also do it with myself, which is, but I've got one particular individual who's, a lot of my friends would say I'm financially conservative, but he makes me look like the most liberal spender of all time. And effectively, I say, right, talk me out of this. And he'll make normally a really good argument. But I'll try and talk myself out of things and say, okay, let me really try and argue why I shouldn't do this investment. Like when I'm most emotionally hot and going, this is an absolute slam dunk. In fact, I forget the name of it, Ian. You remind me, I have to dig this out, because this is a little card game, or like a board game, an exercise I do with my kids. I forget what it's called. It's called something like Articulate It or something like that. And effectively, you've got a topic where you've got two teams. And it's kind of like debating that they do in US schools but not UK schools. And depending on how the dice is rolled, you have one team that's for it and one team that's against it. And so you've got to argue for or against a particular point. And it's helpful to help children especially understand different perspectives. You know, like the cliche, they take controversial topics in America like abortion or things like that, and argue for or against. Or in debating topics, they say, okay, you've got to understand the facts so you can argue both points of view. And I think that's tremendously healthy, because I think when emotion goes up, intellect goes down. So, you know, you can justify yourself, confirmation bias, into doing just about any crazy crap. But, you know, if you look around your life, my experience, Ian, is most of my problems started out in my head as a good idea. I started a business, I hired an employee, I invested in something, whatever, thinking it'd be a good idea, and then it came back and bit me in the ass. And actually, I think the more emotional I am on a topic, whether emotionally high or like positive emotion, like really motivated, excited, inspired, or even true when it's negative, you know, when you're angry, frustrated, pissed off, I'm more likely to do something that I'm going to regret later. So arguing against myself and getting external people, which is part of the power of a mastermind group, right? Somebody able to tell you, here's why you're being an idiot. In fact, internally, this wouldn't make sense on your podcast, Ian, but what am I well known for? Inside the private mastermind groups especially, I will often take the stance without revealing it, whereas even if I agree with your point of view, I will argue the best possible case as to why that is the most stupid, idiotic, retarded thing that I've ever heard in my life, without giving away that whether or not I believe it. And if I can shake you, right, and I'll do that to make people really reconsider it, right? And if I can shake you enough to reconsider it, okay, well now you can make a more balanced decision. So it's more likely, in my experience, to be a long-term good decision, not because it was based upon some emotional high that you got because somebody gave you a good sales pitch, right?
Very interesting. I do exactly the same, Dan, and the financial coaching elements that we do. That I have to hide what my belief is regarding that decision, just because usually what that person's probably getting, certainly from themselves, they're massaging their own ego in terms of, oh, look at the amazing decision I can make, but also probably the loved ones around them are doing the same. So my view is I just got to take the opposing view, even for the point of view, just to go, they might make the decision anyway, but at least it was based off a balanced argument that they may have had with themselves to reach that decision.
Correct. So I mean, think about this. So in your financial coaching, Ian, or in the kind of business coaching that I do, the clients often think that the outcome, the goal, is for them to make more money. That's not the goal. That's a byproduct. That's an effect. But the actual outcome is to make them more educated, more intelligent business owners who make better decisions. Because, you know, the obvious cliche expression would be teach somebody to fish rather than give them a fish. It's like, yeah, okay, if you say do X, Y, Z and they do it, and then you're giving them the fish. But actually to understand how to make better business decisions, financial decisions, etc., to assess it is more helpful, because, yeah, they'll get the win now. They'll get this fish that you were going to give them anyway, but actually they're more likely to catch their own fish in the future, right?
Yeah, no, it's really good. Dan, got a couple of questions before we go, right? But I'll do the first one first, and I'll go to a point where you can tell us about how people can find out about you. And then I've got a nice quirky question to finish off with, right? So the first question first is one possibly a little bit of deep thinking. Maybe it might be needed, or maybe not. And it's, would you say currently that you're happy?
Yes. I would say I'm very happy.
Good. Reasons why? What do you think makes that happen?
That's a good question. So first of all, disclaimer would be I wouldn't say that's always been true, but I'm definitely in a phase of my life where I'm very happy and fulfilled, and I would say the reason why that's the case is I spend the majority of my time doing what I love, surrounded by people that I love.
Fantastic. Yeah, I love it. Dan, where obviously you mentioned 2 books, both bestsellers, if I remember correctly, and both actually really good books. Read them both. So you've got the 2 books, yeah. Breeding Gazelles, the first one, and Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity. Yeah, both available on Amazon. People want to be able to get them.
Yes.
Also, where can people find? Brilliant. Where can people find out about you? Where can people find out about what you do?
Yeah, thank you, Ian. So 2 places. I mean, yes, get the books on Amazon, and it's not named yet, Ian, but I've written another book that we're going through the editing, so hopefully will be out within the next couple of months, and that will appear on Amazon in due course. And the two places where people might be interested. Number one is if you love this podcast, also check out the Dan Bradbury podcast. Some great interviews and stuff on there. There's a weekly podcast. So the Dan Bradbury podcast, anywhere where podcasts are available. And if you go over to danbradbury.com, my website, there's a couple of different scorecards that you can take. So the business profit maximization scorecard, and there's a financial literacy scorecard as well, where you can take to assess your business in a variety of different ways. And there's 6 key areas, and it'll give you a custom kind of 20+ page PDF as to where your business is strong and weak and what to do about it. And you can find all that at danbradbury.com.
So Dan, thanks so much for being so open and honest, and sharing everything about you and your successes and that sort of stuff. Before you go, one quirky question is, if you were to have to start a new business tomorrow, but completely unrelated to what you currently do, what would it be and why?
Oh, that's a great question. So if it was unrelated to what I do, because that's the obvious answer, I've got 2 things that come up which are completely different, so I'll say them both. One's kind of cheating because I'm kind of involved in the area anyway. I'd probably go sideways 1 step. I love accountancy, finance, etc. So some kind of accountancy, bookkeeping, or kind of financial advisory firm is probably something that I'd be inclined towards, because I think the game of business is the same. The same 6 areas apply. It just shows up in that area, so the subject matter's got to interest you. And the other one, which is completely different, but it's also the same, it's another area that interests me, is I'm uber passionate about health and fitness. And right now, one of the I've bought and sold gyms and health and fitness businesses in the past, and there's actually 2 businesses at the moment that are both in the health and fitness field. The one that is a chain of gyms, and another is a slightly more niche area. And because it's just a game of business, growing, scaling, but you might as well enjoy the subject matter as well. So, but you could say that's cheating because I kind of already got the interest in those. But yeah, that's my best 2 answers.
No, fantastic. Dan, it's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. It's been really good, and thanks again so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Cheers. Dan, I'll keep it recording because sometimes bits crop up that are useful as to drop in some places. But no, thank you. Useful.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and actually some good areas, bits that I probably didn't know and things as well. I know all the cliche stuff because I could see behind you the Iron Man stuff, and I was thinking, oh yeah, that's the normal route that comes up and goes down to actually, yeah, surprisingly good on off other routes, and yeah, those bits. So
yeah, it was some good questions. Yeah, it was some good questions because, yeah, I just answered what came to mind. So I suspect if we recorded it again tomorrow, you'd probably get some different questions because it's in many respects what's topical, and also I do try and use whatever's topical in my mind, whereas it wasn't especially topical. But I did watch that Michael Berry, Warren Buffett are we in an ETF bubble thing today? And I was like, oh, that's quite interesting. Yeah, that's why I threw it in.
Yeah, to be fair, I think that's the interesting thing. I think that comes out that ultimately, I'm just trying to get to that bit that goes, these people are normal. Yeah, like, yeah, that sort of same discovery that I had, to come and hang around, the various people within your mastermind group, just to go, they're special, but they're special because they realize how simple actually the process is, and you've just got to be consistent in terms of the approach you're taking. Where I think most people are looking for, but no, it can't be that. It must be more complex.
Unfortunately, to completely align, Ian, because you're exactly right. Because if you look at the people that have got the kind of 7-figure profits or have grown to 7-figure profits while in the program, you kind of go, all of them have got problems. Like, yes, they're sharp and there's some good raw material there, whether they're really good at marketing or they're really good at whatever, recruiting or whatever it might be. So they might have some certain personality traits that help them, support them, but actually they've all got problems, and the common denominator is they've been strengthening their weaknesses whilst also maximising their strengths, improving their weaknesses, and they've done it over an extended period of time, right?
Yeah, I think it's that. One of the main recognitions actually that we had out of it was how we pitched what we do, in terms of actually we sort of realized off the back of it to go, people want the latter stages of what we do. They want financial clarity and they want financial freedom. So we sort of go, this is everything that draws everybody in, and you go, great, I know that's what you want, but actually what you need at this moment in time is just financial control.
Yes.
And often we go, look, this is great, but we need to park that and put that in the future, because that's what you're searching for, and it is potentially possible. But actually, if you just get financial control, these other things will happen over a period of time by
correct.
Yeah, planning for things. Obviously you're an advocate of business planning and strategic planning and so on, and budgeting and cash flow forecasting. And once you're bringing all these things in that bring in clarity and control and predictability, actually financial success usually comes along with that in a way.
Well, correct, right? It probably is usually the right term, because it couldn't be always, because I don't think that's always the case. But you're right, it's the byproducts. It's kind of like, you want to lose weight, fine. The KPI is the measurement on the scales, but the critical driver is the diet and the exercise, right? So effectively, if you've got good financial disciplines, good financial controls, naturally you're going to improve your free cash flow, which then, if you apply the same principles with that cash in the business or in your personal life, it's kind of like, you don't spend everything you've got a personal budget, and you spend it in it's X and you save Y, and etc., and then over time it just takes care of itself. And then you look up and people go, holy shit, how have you got a balance sheet of X or whatever? And it's like, well, I didn't just wake up one day and actually that's one of the things that I detest about the M&A stuff. Like, it's a useful skill for people at the time, but what I detest about it is people are like, I'll get an exit and I'll get all my money. And I'm like, oh my God, like all your eggs in that one basket. It's like, that's a very, well, it's not a game I play with. My entire future or pension, comes from an exit of a company. Good God. Like, you're asking to be punched in the face by life there, right? But it is just core discipline. It's like, I've made a lot of money for a lot of time, and I've spent, I've saved 50% of my income for a decade. And really, like, if you figure out how to make your life work on that, regardless of your income level, relative to your income level, you're going to retire exceptionally wealthy. Right? And you don't even need to be 50%. You could probably get away with being, well, probably between 10 and 20%, and you're going to be financially free and secure for the rest of your life. But, of course, it makes me think of there's another Charlie Munger quote. He says that, like, whenever he speaks to students, they always ask the same thing, which is some version of, how can I be like you, i.e. rich, but younger, i.e. not old? And Charlie Munger's answer is always the same. He's like, I have no idea. He's like, the only way I know how to do it is to be rich and old, because I've done things right for a very long period of time. But the students never want to know that. They never want to know the details about how that was done. It was like, yeah, that's nice, Charlie, but you're in your 90s and you're a billionaire. Great. Can you tell me how to be in my 30s and a billionaire? And he's like, well, I don't know.
Yep.
And you're like, yep, there you go. But that's because the students probably, in a lot of cases, want to have the lifestyle associated with being a billionaire or a millionaire or whatever it is that they want. But actually, what they're not prepared to tolerate is you've got somebody there who quite blatantly has lived frugally relative to their income and net worth for an extended, for their entire lives, longer than the person asking the question's been alive, right?
Yep. Yeah, I think, it's very insightful, and I think, there's a lot of people chasing. They want the quick wins of the Facebook story or something along that sort of lines, where they just go, oh, but actually these are. They're few and far between. Actually, there's plenty of people who are generating good wealth, but it's through being consistent.
Correct.
And doing
well, of course, because actually the Facebook story, the exception proves the rule. People point to it, but it's like, okay, well, 1 in 20 million people win the lottery who play it. It's kind of like, it doesn't mean it's a good strategy for building wealth. The fact that, one in 50,000 people became Mark Zuckerberg, and it's obviously a much higher number than 1 in 50,000, but you know what I mean? Like, how many tens of thousands of funded tech startups were they that just literally went broke, right? Yeah. And you're gonna go, so people that it's worthwhile as having the visionaries like the Elon Musks and the world's a better place because of people like that, I think, but just know that it's not a guarantee for success. In fact, quite clearly, by the law of averages, the people that do it the long way round are, in a sense, you're assured success. If you're willing to take 20 or 30 years to get there, by all means, try stuff to get you there in 5 if you can as well, but don't sacrifice the 30-year version because you're doing the 5-year version.
Yep. No, makes a lot of sense. Thanks so much, Dan.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, fantastic. Cheers, Dan. Speak soon.
Thanks, Ian. Enjoyed it. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Leaky Bucket podcast. I'd love it if you could help spread the message by clicking subscribe and leaving a review. Also, please do reach out to me on LinkedIn and let me know your thoughts on this episode. You can also find more info and links in the show notes below. See you next time. Coming next week on the Leaky Bucket podcast.
Anyway, so I come back from this business trip, and my son, he's only 1 year old, he's giving me the cold shoulder. I'm like, Beth, what's wrong with Bo? Why is he acting like he doesn't know who I am? And she said something that changed my life. She said, well, you were gone so long, he kind of forgot who you were. And I was like, wait, what? And that emotionally, that hit me. And I had this moment of dawning comprehension where I went back to my own childhood, like, oh wait, both my parents worked, my brother wasn't there, I'd come home to an empty house, and I made what's called a clarifying decision. That night I said, no matter what, I'm going to be a work from home dad. No matter what, this is not going to happen again.